Most people spend hundreds of dollars trying to make their garden look warm and expensive, but they walk right past the one thing that could transform the whole place for almost nothing. I see it all the time. Old fence boards, weathered pallets, cracked wooden crates, and pieces of forgotten timber get burned or thrown away without a second thought. That is the mistake. Every time you throw away old wood, you throw away character that money simply cannot buy. I learned this many years ago, and ever since then I have looked at every old board as if it already knew what it wanted to become. If you stay with me today, I will show you 15 simple wooden ideas that have made my own garden feel calmer, warmer, and much more welcoming without spending much money at all. None of these projects require expensive tools or special skills, and most of them can be finished over a quiet weekend. The funny thing is that visitors often think I bought these decorations from an expensive garden center, but when I tell them almost everything came from old wood that someone else wanted to throw away, they can hardly believe it. That is because old wood carries a natural look that fresh lumber cannot copy. The small cracks, faded color, and worn texture tell a story that makes even a simple garden feel comfortable. One thing that many people do wrong is trying to make every piece look brand new. Years ago, an older neighbor showed me something that completely changed the way I worked with reclaimed wood. He smiled and said, "Never fight the age of the wood because that age is exactly what makes it beautiful." I never forgot those words. Since then, I clean the wood, make it safe, and let its natural appearance do most of the work. You do not need fancy paint or expensive decorations. You only need to place each piece where it belongs. Before we build anything, I want to show you the first project that completely changed the entrance to my garden, with only a few forgotten boards. It is so simple that almost nobody believes the difference it makes until they see it with their own eyes, and once you understand why it works, you will start looking at every old piece of wood very differently. The first thing I always tell people is not to rush into building something large because the smallest change often creates the biggest impression. The first project I made from old wood was a simple welcome frame near the garden gate. I found 2 weathered boards behind an old shed and another shorter piece that looked completely useless. Most people would have burned them without thinking twice. I brushed away the loose dirt, removed the old nails, sanded only the rough edges so nobody could get a splinter, and joined the pieces together into a simple standing frame. I did not try to hide every crack because those marks gave it a natural look that fresh lumber never has. Then I placed a small flower pot at the base and hung a wooden sign with the family name. The whole entrance suddenly felt different. People slowed down before walking into the garden, and almost everyone asked where I had bought it. They were surprised when I told them it cost almost nothing. Very few people do this because they believe expensive decorations create a beautiful entrance, but an old piece of wood with a little care often feels much warmer. The second idea came from another forgotten pile of timber that had been sitting outside for years. I turned several short boards into simple raised platforms for flower pots. There was nothing complicated about it. I cut the boards to equal lengths, fastened them together, and made sturdy little stands of different heights. Instead of placing every pot directly on the ground, I arranged them at different levels. That one small change gave the whole corner of the garden much more depth and made even ordinary flowers look more impressive. Most people make the mistake of placing everything in one straight line, but our eyes naturally enjoy different heights and layers. An older friend showed me this many years ago, and I still use the same idea every season. The best part is that these wooden stands become even more attractive as they slowly age outside. You do not have to protect every surface with shiny paint because a soft, weathered finish fits naturally into a country garden. As I kept looking around my yard, I realized there was one forgotten area that still looked empty no matter how many flowers I planted there. The solution turned out to be another simple wooden project that cost almost nothing, but completely changed the feeling of that quiet corner. And that is where I discovered one of my favorite ideas of all. One corner of my garden always seemed unfinished no matter how many flowers I planted there. It was not ugly, but it never felt inviting. I kept thinking I needed to spend money on a bench or expensive decorations until an older man showed me something so simple that I wondered why I had never thought about it myself. He told me that an empty corner does not always need more plants. Sometimes it only needs a reason for your eyes to stop there. I gathered several old pieces of thick wood that had once been part of a broken fence. After cleaning them and making sure they were solid, I stacked them at different heights to create a small display corner. One piece became a base for a lantern. Another held a clay pot filled with herbs. The tallest piece supported an old metal watering can that I no longer used. Suddenly, the corner had personality. It looked peaceful without looking crowded, and almost everyone who visited the garden walked over to take a closer look. Very few people try this because they believe every decoration has to be perfect, but the little marks, faded color, and worn edges are exactly what make reclaimed wood feel real. The next idea came almost by accident. I had several short boards that were too small for furniture, and I almost threw them away. Instead, I joined them into simple wooden boxes without bottoms and placed them around groups of flowers. They worked like rustic frames that quietly separated one planting area from another. The flowers suddenly looked more organized even though I had not planted anything new. Most people make the mistake of filling every space with more plants, but sometimes the space around the flowers is just as important as the flowers themselves. That lesson stayed with me for years. Another forgotten method that many people overlook is using old wooden slices cut from thick branches. If you have access to fallen trees or old firewood, those round pieces can become beautiful stepping stones between flower beds or around a small seating area. They create a warm, country feeling that expensive concrete pavers often cannot match. I always leave a little space between each slice so grass or creeping plants can grow around them naturally. The result looks softer and more welcoming. As I finished that area, I noticed something interesting. The garden no longer felt like separate parts scattered across the yard. It started to feel connected, almost as if every little wooden detail was quietly leading you toward the next surprise, and the next project became the one that visitors remembered most long after they had gone home. The project that surprised my visitors more than any other was something I almost did not build because it looked too simple. I found an old wooden ladder leaning against the back wall of a small shed. It was faded, a little rough around the edges, and no longer safe for climbing, but the wood itself was still solid. Most people would have taken it apart for firewood, but I saw something different. I cleaned it carefully, tightened a few loose joints, and leaned it against an old fence near my vegetable beds. Then I placed small flower pots, lanterns, and a few old garden tools on the steps. I even wrapped a climbing plant around one side and let nature slowly take over. Within one season, the whole ladder looked like it had always belonged there. People constantly stopped to look at it because it added height without making the space feel crowded. That is something many people miss. A garden needs places where your eyes naturally travel upward instead of staying only on the ground. Years ago, someone showed me that secret, and ever since then I have tried to include at least one tall wooden feature in every part of my yard. After that, I started looking at old pallets differently. Most people see them as rough shipping wood, but I see ready-made material waiting for another life. One afternoon, I turned a single pallet into a simple, vertical herb wall. I removed a few damaged boards, reinforced the back, and added shallow wooden shelves. Soon, I had fresh basil, thyme, parsley, and mint growing together in one compact space. It saved room, looked beautiful, and made harvesting herbs much easier because everything was at a comfortable height. Very few people think about using old wood to organize plants instead of simply decorating with it. That small change makes the garden feel tidy without looking formal. Another forgotten idea that still works today is building simple wooden edging around a favorite flower bed. You do not need perfect boards. Slightly uneven pieces actually create a softer country look. I push them a little into the soil, leaving different heights above the ground, and the flower bed suddenly stands out without expensive stone borders. The best part is that every season the wood slowly blends with the garden even more. It feels natural instead of manufactured. As I finished those projects, I realized there was still one place that lacked warmth after sunset. During the day, everything looked inviting, but when evening arrived, something was missing, and the next old piece of wood solved that problem in a way I never expected. When evening comes, I like to walk through the garden one last time before going inside, and for many years one area always felt cold and empty after the sun disappeared. I kept thinking I needed expensive outdoor lighting until I remembered an old wooden crate sitting in my workshop. It had carried apples many years before, and the wood had already turned a soft gray color from age. Instead of throwing it away, I turned it upside down, placed a simple solar lantern inside, and set another small lantern on top. The light came through the gaps between the boards and created a warm pattern on the ground. It was such a small change, yet the whole garden suddenly felt welcoming even after dark. Many people make the mistake of using bright lights everywhere, but soft light often creates a much more comfortable feeling. That old crate became one of my favorite evening decorations, and it cost almost nothing. A few weeks later, I found several leftover pieces of weathered timber that were too short for any large project. Most people would have called them useless, but I joined them into simple birdhouses and small feeders. I did not worry about making them perfect because birds certainly do not care if every corner is perfectly square. Before long, I started seeing more birds visiting the garden every morning. Their songs made the whole place feel alive, and the wooden feeders blended naturally with the trees. Years ago, someone told me that a beautiful garden is not only about what you see but also about what you hear, and I have never forgotten that advice. Another forgotten method that very few people use today is creating simple wooden markers for vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Instead of buying plastic labels every spring, I cut narrow strips from old boards, sand the edges, and write the plant names by hand. They last for years and slowly become even more attractive as the seasons pass. Every visitor notices them because they add a quiet handmade touch that cannot be bought in a store. One thing I always avoid is making too many decorations at once. Most people fill every corner until the garden feels crowded, but I learned that empty space is just as important as decoration. Every wooden piece should have room to breathe so your eyes can enjoy it. As I looked across my garden after finishing these projects, I realized there were still a few forgotten boards leaning behind the shed, and those last pieces became part of one final idea that quietly brought the entire garden together in a way I never expected. Those last few boards leaning behind my old shed had been sitting there for so many years that I almost stopped noticing them. One afternoon, I picked them up simply to clean the area, but before I carried them away, I laid them on the ground beside my little sitting space. That was the moment another simple idea appeared. I joined the boards together into a narrow rustic table just large enough for 2 cups of coffee, a small flower pot, and an old watering can filled with fresh garden flowers. It was not perfect, and it was never meant to be. The wood still showed every mark from years of rain and sunshine, and that was exactly why it looked right in the garden. Since then, that little table has become the place where I begin almost every morning. I sit there with a warm drink, listen to the birds, and enjoy the quiet before the day becomes busy. Very few people realize that a garden becomes truly beautiful when it invites you to stay, instead of simply giving you something to look at. That old table cost almost nothing, yet it completely changed the way I use the space. Another project that brought everything together was a simple wooden frame around a small barrel that collects rainwater. Most people try to hide practical things in the garden, but I learned many years ago that useful objects can become part of the decoration if you treat them with a little care. I wrapped the barrel with weathered boards, added a small wooden shelf for a flower pot, and placed a lantern beside it. Suddenly, something ordinary became one of the nicest corners in the yard. Many visitors never even realized it was a rain barrel until I pointed it out. That taught me another valuable lesson. The best decorations are often the ones that quietly serve a purpose at the same time. One mistake that many people make is buying new decorations every season because they become bored with the old ones. I rarely do that. Instead, I simply move my wooden pieces to different places around the garden. A flower stand becomes a lantern stand. A crate that held herbs this year might display pumpkins in autumn or evergreen branches during winter. Old wood is easy to rearrange, and every small change makes the garden feel fresh again without spending another dollar. By now, almost every forgotten piece of timber had found a new life. Yet there was one final lesson that mattered even more than any single project, because it completely changed the way I looked at every old board I found from that day forward. After all these years, I have learned that a beautiful garden is not built with a large wallet. It is built with patience, simple ideas, and the willingness to see value where other people see waste. Every old board, every weathered crate, every forgotten piece of timber has the chance to become part of a place where you enjoy spending time. That is probably the biggest lesson I can share with you today. I stopped chasing expensive decorations a long time ago because I realized they often look nice on the day you buy them, but they rarely tell a story. Old wood already has its own story, and when you give it a second life in the garden, it becomes something personal that no store can ever sell. I still smile when someone visits and asks where I found a certain decoration because the answer is almost always the same. It came from an old fence, an unused pallet, a broken crate, or a forgotten pile of lumber that almost ended up in the fire. That is why I encourage you to walk around your own yard before buying anything new. Look behind the garage, inside the shed, or beside an old fence. You may already have everything you need to create a warmer and more welcoming garden. Start with just one small project. Do not worry about making it perfect. Clean the wood, make it safe, place it where it feels natural, and let time do the rest. Most people make the mistake of trying to finish everything in one weekend, but the most comfortable gardens usually grow little by little over many seasons. Every spring you add one simple detail. Every autumn you move something to a better place. Before you realize it, the whole garden begins to reflect your own personality instead of looking like a page from a catalog. That is what happened to me, and I would not change it for anything. I hope these simple wooden ideas inspire you to see old materials differently and to enjoy creating something with your own hands. If even one forgotten board becomes a decoration that makes you smile every morning, then this video has done exactly what I hoped it would do. And the next time we meet, I want to show you even more forgotten country ideas that can make any ordinary garden feel peaceful, useful, and welcoming without spending a fortune.